Go, Justin. No pressure.
Another episode of Digitizing 911. These obviously have been very popular since this is what, third week in a row where people are having some issues with the design. So
You know why that is? It's because we have a lot of downtime. So we're focusing on the stuff that we can't get right now before like we really get busy.
that's true. Didn't think about that. Those designs have been driving people crazy.
So they're
See,
going
and
back to it.
I thought it was because we figured out how to get Justin to digitize designs for free.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Listen, that hat is bomb, buddy. I just gotta tell you. Yep, I'm gonna be stitching that out. I'm pretty excited about it, actually.
Yeah, in case anybody didn't see, these are available on my site for free. I have some designs for the 4th of July if you'd like to download them. So go check them out. Links in the notes there. Okay. So we had another person send in a design. This one's a little bit different in that I spoke to the person and they haven't sewed it out actually yet. But they saw it last week's Digitizing 911. Saw some things that we did on that file and it wasn't in their file.
And they went, wait a minute.
And they went, wait a minute. And they did specifically ask us, hey, you know, don't dump on the original digitizer, which I don't even know who digitized it. They didn't give me that information, but I did let her know, you know, this isn't where we want to take someone's file and say, oh, they've done it, so wrong, and they, you know, this is terrible. This is just another perspective where we have, you know, 4 embroiderers here, 3 digitizers,
and a partridge in a pear tree.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
And a newbie. Yes. Right?
Yeah, that's me. I just started like last Tuesday.
But it's just another perspective on the design. And sometimes, you know, there's designs where, you know, I may digitize it and Jeff sees it and say, hey, you know, you may want to do this, this, and this, or this is something I do. And then it's like kind of that light bulb goes up like, oh, okay. Kind of like, you know, using the correct density on a 3D design.
Yeah, like that's totally a thing. Like your puff goes really, really fast if you don't use the right density. It's just like done like that. But, you know, full disclaimer here, if you have an issue with a file, always let your digitizer know.
Right.
Because I've had times where I've had people send me a file and it's like, well, have you talked to your digitizer? No, I sent it to you. And I mean, I've gotten Justin's files before. I'm sure Justin's gotten mine. I've gotten them from all sorts of people. And it's kind of like, well, you know, they want to help you and they want you to succeed. And so if there's an issue with their file, they can't learn and grow unless you let them know about it.
Right.
It also helps for someone like me who's learning what to look for.
Exactly.
You know,
and there's times where, you know, your digitizer, you know, there's times where there's the human aspect of it. There might be something that I miss in a file, and if you know it's something you point out, it's like, oh no, I
like using the wrong density on a 3D puff design.
Like using the wrong density. Okay, everybody. Jeff keeps bringing that up for weeks now. I had sent him a file to run prior to, I think it was
St. Patty's Day. I remember. I spent so long cleaning that hat.
He was nice enough to say that he would sample one of my stock designs, and I gave it to him prematurely and didn't have the right settings. So he's running a 3D design on a hat, and he's like, what are you doing here? Is this supposed to have this density? And I looked at the file. I'm like, no, it is not. So
it went so fast.
Yeah. It was awesome. I was working on the speed of 3D designs. So, anywho, let's
do you want me to get to the comments? The only reason why I'm here? Do you want me to just do my job and wait over here? Okay.
Please do.
Okay. We have Letty who is here who's saying, Justin, your designs are wonderful.
From Ohio.
Well, she didn't say that.
I know I did.
Listen, Vanna White. If you want to do the job, go ahead. And this is Barb from North Central Minnesota. Is that better? And we have Martha from St. Louis. I don't know who that is, but hello to Orlando.
TMG Custom Design.
Yeah, but I don't know who the person is.
I just call him TMG Custom Design.
Got it. Well, whatever. Hello to everybody. I am here just for the comic relief and to ask the questions from a newbie standpoint, help out Mr. Justin, and whatnot. So that's why I'm here, and to play Vanna White apparently, because you know what,
see, I touched the tile, and it
we don't have Mike to be the comic relief, so they brought me in. I don't know why, but here we are. So there you go.
I blame Justin.
My fault.
And it's all Justin's fault. But we're here. We're showing up. So Justin, you gonna get started?
Let's take a look here.
Let's do it.
So did you get a chance to take a look at the files there, DJ and Jeff?
How about you, Nick? Did you see it?
No, I'm supposed to be stitching it out apparently because I got roped into that too. No, I really, if you notice, the machine's not even on.
No, you're supposed to open hatch and get started.
Oh, right on it. Oh, actually, darn, my hatch isn't working today. Sorry. It's a little warm here in the Northeast.
All right. So this is a quick JPEG of the design that's in question here. The T and the V looking shape is supposed to be a 3D puff as far as the center parts in here. It's got it's kind of a low res JPEG, but there's a black flat outline and then the text above. So let's just jump right into, this was a DST file that was sent. As you can see, usually you can tell that when it's following the default palette in your digitizing window. You can kind of tell that it's usually not a native file when it doesn't have the correct color set to it. So except for PES files, isn't that right? PES files actually
retain the color information.
The color information, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So okay. So first thing I always like to do is take a quick look at how this sews out. So let's slow that down. So this one starts off with just a single run stitch underlay, and then comes around with the outline shape, the bottom section. Speed through that a little bit, and then same for the T, running stitch outline. And then as you can see, the idea of doing the 3D puff elements last is being followed in here. This is also sewing center out. It's also correctly being kind of chopped up into pieces to make sure that the registration is properly working. So the inside and the outline of the text isn't gonna, get off. If you were to do all the inside color and then come back and do all the border color or the borders on the text, you're gonna have registration issues by the time it gets back to the other side of the hat. So all that is properly done in my opinion. The one thing I would do, and there are those times where the idea of doing the foam last may or may not work in the design. And the fact that the design does the bottom section as far as the outline, then it goes back and there's so many color changes and movement from left to right on the top text. I would actually, if I were having this design in production, I would do the outline, I would do the 3D puff element. And the only thing that's going to really add, especially because this is such a simple lined art with the 3D puff elements, it would be a quick thing that if you do add that stop after the 3D puff elements are sewn, it's going to be a quick thing that you can rip off that excess foam between it before it starts that top text that's going to be flat. I know it goes against the grain when the usual idea of trying to do all the 3D elements last, but I think you're okay with the gap between here. That's where it's going to be sewing the text to the 3D elements. And again, because the 3D elements are such a simple shape that, doing a quick tear when it's on the machine isn't going to affect production all that much. And of course, you have to remove that excess quickly, just because you're sewing that top text. You don't want that sewing over the foam. So that's one thing I would say that is one thing I would change in this file.
So I'm gonna throw that as kind of a double-edged sword, because I've done this with hat designs too, where you get a design that just the layout of the design, it's got a large shape, it's got some central element, that it's actually better to do it non-conventional.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that can be is when you send that file to somebody, they're so used to conventional, they'll look at it and go, this is wrong. It can't be this way. And so now as a digitizer, you're stuck. Like for instance, this one, you're kind of stuck is, well, do I sew the text? It would be better to sew the puff first, but it's probably going to come back if I sew the puff and then sew the text.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of stuck in that area where conventional isn't always the best route.
Exactly. And yeah, and if I were digitizing this design and I decided to do that unconventional way of doing the 3D puff within the design first, I would definitely notate to that customer, because I usually do a spec sheet with PDF spec sheet with all the information on the design. I would make a notation, hey, you could run this a little bit differently. Run the 3D as your second color, remove excess, and then continue on with that design. Because like you said, 9 times out of 10, especially someone that's been doing this a while, they're gonna understand the process and what it 99% of the time they're gonna look for. So you wouldn't want them to run this and to be in the middle of like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. So, all right. So that would be an easy change. I could just go ahead and select that, and of course, using Wacom, I could just resequence it. So now that element is going to be the second element in the design. I'm going to change this color just so we can kind of differentiate. There we go. Okay, so that's an easy fix as far as resequencing. So now it does the outline first, 3D second, and then it's going to go back and do the top text. The one thing that I always preach when doing hats, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off all these, is I preach global underlay, always. What that's going to do is to make sure that your hat, and I don't know what kind of hat this is going on, but a structured hat is going to be a little bit different than something like an unconstructed dad hat or something like that. But global underlay, no matter what type of hat you have, is going to be something where it secures the hat. It secures the stabilizer to the back of the hat, and it's just going to make that surface a little more flat, a little bit easier to work on. So you're not going to have so much shifting in the material. So global underlay is one thing that I would definitely add, since there's only basically a single center walk underlay under this. The densities, especially for hats, selecting these satins, they're at 0.45. I think the densities are a little light for hats. I would probably go to, there we go, 0.36. Hats, I know, Jeff, you said you like using a little bit extra density on hats.
Yeah, I usually go like a 0.35. It just, I don't know if it's the curve of the surface or if it's, I don't know, but you don't get the same coverage on a hat that you do on a flat.
Right.
And so you just have to bump up your density a little bit. And if you don't, it's going to look thin.
Right. Another thing that I noticed on here, when you're talking about push and pull in embroidery and in digitizing, it's definitely something that you need to learn about when digitizing, because it affects pretty much every design and every stitch that you're working with. When you're working with 3D puff, it's exponentially worse as far as the push and pull that you get with the design, since you are fighting against that foam that wants to push out. So that's another thing that I noticed on here. But let's go ahead and
hey, Justin.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
You-
Nope. Dang it! I was gonna do Vanna White. Okay,
Sorry.
hold on. There's a question, and then I
Yeah.
move my hands like this, and then you click.
Sorry. I didn't know what he was doing. Anyway, she would like to know what global underlay is.
That's what I was going to do here.
You were going to get too far. And then, whoop, not that one. Let me go to this one first. While you're at, that's what Cindy said. She thinks that. So while you're thinking about all of that, these are the 3 things you need to think about because you might answer all of them at the same time.
Okay.
And then there you go. So there's your 3 questions.
What was that last one?
What is the density you would use to do puff on a leather cap? I've never done a leather cap, actually.
I'm intrigued, Justin.
So you have to first answer what is global underlay.
I'll touch on that too. I'll get it. I
get them in order, I guess.
Myself.
Yes.
Okay, so typically global underlay, I usually use a running stitch just because so I can control exactly where the needle points are falling. You could also use a fill stitch that has a really, really light density with no underlay to it. I usually do.
I don't have global underlay in Hatch. So what is the other name of it?
No, you're manually digitizing the global.
You're manually doing
Got
it. It's not a button push, give me global underlay.
Okay.
Things like this where you're trying to control your material and you're wanting to make sure that it sews a certain way in a certain direction, in a certain pathing. I never usually rely on a automatic setting, even if there is one. When you're not too worried about the material and how it's going to react to whatever that function may be, it's definitely a shortcut. It's something that these expensive softwares are built for, that have these bells and whistles that can help you out. But something like this, where I'm trying to make sure that it is doing its job and nothing more, I do it manually. So
got it.
Global underlay is what I'm basically going to do from the center out. And again, using your guide here, I have it on the 0. So there's your center point. You don't want to start right on your center because you don't want to do those lock stitches right on the seam. So I usually start off here to the side to avoid that seam. And so I'm basically just working my way out from the center, work my way back down. And again, working my way out, kind of grab the edges. And basically that is just securing that shape, this whole V looking shape to the hat, and really tacking it down to the backing that you're using or the stabilizer that you're using. Resequence that. Now, when I get these DST files and there's manual stitches, there's no clear place where they have a start and stop point. So typically when I'm editing stuff, I'll go ahead and delete those stitches. I can see that the start and stop point of this satin are here on the end. So I'll go ahead and go back to my running stitch that I just did. Make sure that it ends back where those start. Okay. So now it has the global underlay where it goes center out. Again, just kind of stabilizing that area before it starts that outline stitch. And then I'll go ahead and add that onto this one as well. And following the rule, bottom up. And center out. Resequence that up. Again, I'm going to find my start and stop of that satin, which is down here. Where did I end that one? I ended it back here. So go ahead and start that down here. Okay. So now I added the global underlay. So Now those two pieces have the global underlay added. So again, now this whole center area of this hat is going to be more secure to your backing, flattened out as much as it can, especially when dealing with these kind of thinner elements. That as much as you can possibly do without, really jamming a bunch of unnecessary stitches into your design, which will increase your stitch count, which can possibly create thread breaks or whatnot if you are really hammering the stitches in there, but it's the best you can do with this type of shape of design. One other thing too, because we were talking about the extreme push and pull of 3D puff, normally the difference between the flat stitches and the 3D puff stitches, it looks like there is a lot of area here. You can actually measure that. So in essence, if you're looking at this traditionally digitized, this would be a 1.57 millimeter stroke or border on the element. If you're doing the traditional way where it's, the inside of the letter and then a satin stitch done to the outside, that would probably be sufficient as far as the difference of area between the two. But because this inner part is going to be having that foam pushing out, pretty much that whole element of the TV is going to be a lot more bolder, pushing in every direction because of that foam. So to ensure that, I usually over exaggerate when I'm doing the outlines. Again, because I am editing a DST file. See how it gives so many nodes, and I don't want to go in there and change all those nodes. I'm going to go ahead and just add some pull compensation. So pull compensation, as you can see, the higher the number there, the wider the satin's going to be. So I just kind of, even though it may not match up with the original artwork, which I don't have on this, making that much bolder. After it sews out, you're going to have these satins pulling in from the edges. So it's going to shrink those areas, and you're going to have your 3D elements pushing out. So you're basically trying to over exaggerate those two elements, one direction one way, and then the other direction the other way, to make sure that when they sew, they even out. Stop me if there's any questions. I'm not paying attention to that.
So I have a question.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask if you answered the question about the density on the leather cap real quick.
That's why I was going to my question.
I have not, but the density of 3D puff is pretty much where you have to be.
Basic. I mean, no matter what you put it on, what style hat, I guess, because a leather hat is going to be unstructured.
So my thought on this whole thing would be, is it actually leather, or is it marine grade vinyl looking leather?
Or is it leather?
Because the artificial leathers can handle a really high density.
Right.
Real leather, you're going to run into an issue.
Which I have run in production pleather hats with 3D puff, and they didn't run any differently than a regular hat. And the way I kind of preach 3D puff on hats is there's really no room of how you can digitize properly for the 3D puff elements to work. So if you find that you are working with a hat where the extra density in the foam is not working with that material, it may not be the best fit. It's one of those things where everything is not compatible with 3D puff.
So Cindy also asked this question: how many actual colors are in the design, and why would you not do it all flat and then add the puff? I'm thinking production time.
So according to the run sheet, because I have that up and I'm looking at it, there are 2 colors in the design, and pre-Justin touching it, there were 18 color changes in one stop.
Right. So puff or not, when working with a hat, when working with any design, in my opinion, and I know this kind of lends to more of the home machines that have a single needle, where changing out a threaded comb is a pain in the butt. for registration purposes, which registration is basically the way it's lining up all the elements to each other, especially when you're looking at detail or outlines of objects that you need to make sure that they do line up after changing a color. Working with a hat, especially if you just go down and lay down, let me pull up that JPEG again. So basically it's two colors, it's black and gray. So if I were to go back and go in there and lay down all the gray elements first and then come back and do all the black elements first, the registration is going to be off. You might have, if you ended, say, like on the H and Ranch, that's the last element of gray that you do, and then you come back and you start doing the black. You might have the H and the C and the N line up correctly, but by the time you get back to that U, the registration is going to be completely off. You're going to have gray sticking out in areas, and that outline's not going to line up. So
let me just understand this, because my brain now hurts over that entire explanation. So you're saying do the outline of the T and that arrow, then do the puff, and then do the wording?
Correct. That's what we were saying is a little bit.
So you're still doing multiple color changes, even though there's two colors, if you're
Correct.
on a single needle. Okay.
Look at it this way. Look at it this way. So say like you're coloring a picture, and you're coloring a flower with stems. So you have green stems, green leaves. Say the petals are yellow, and then the center is red. Say. Right. So if you would decide to color all the colors first, and then I grab that paper and I pull it an inch, but you start outlining that whole thing in the same place that it was before, it's not going to line up.
Right. So you can't lay the black, in this case, you can't lay the black down first for all of it and then go back in and do the gray.
Exactly.
Because of the fact that you're not sure that gray is going to match back up again on the wording. Just
exactly.
making sure I understand it from a newbie's point of view here.
Working with this surface where it's curved, especially is the problem on a shirt. If the design is small enough and everything's hooped properly with a proper stabilizer, you could get away with something like that. Normally, especially with smaller lettering with borders, I always break it up depending on how large of the surface area that you're working with. Something that you're working with maybe that's 1 inch to 2 inches wide, you can kind of know that it's not going to have that much movement. But something like this, so it's really wider on a hat, you kind of want to break it up. And that's what the original digitizer did, which I believe is correct in my opinion. So
I'm going to throw something in here too. This also depends on your machine, and not necessarily the brand or the make, but how dialed in you have your machine to run hats.
Correct.
When digitizing for production, you're digitizing for middle ground, somebody that may not have it all the way dialed in, and you're trying to get your best, outcome. But if you have somebody that has their machine dialed in, the registration is really good, and you can get away with things that you wouldn't be able to get away with on machines that aren't. I can honestly tell you, when I started, I didn't know what I was doing when I was hooping. I didn't have my machine adjusted, and it didn't matter if I did a letter and then outlined it immediately. It still was off a little bit. And that was because my machine wasn't dialed in. And then as I learned how to properly hoop a hat, how to adjust my machine to get better performance, I could probably do the whole word and go and outline it. So it really, when we talk about this kind of stuff, if your machine is dialed in and you're comfortable running it how you want to run it, go for it.
That's what Cindy's saying too, for production time.
And that's where, I was looking at that question, and like Jeff is saying, if you do hats regularly and you're dialed in for hats, and again, the type of hat is going to make a difference too. You very well, if I was working with Cindy on this design, this was her design, and she says, "Hey, I really want the 3D puff to be last."
Right.
I would digitize it the original way. I would add the things that I'm adding, the adjustments that I'm adding, and say, "Hey, yeah, okay. Well, if you're that comfortable with your machine and you think by the time it gets all the top lettering done and come back and do that foam, and you think the registration is going to be on with the T and the V shape, by all means, let's try it out. You know, with the way I do it in your machine, if it's all dialed in and it's working well, great. In my opinion, 9 times out of 10, especially working with thinner elements like this, where you have a very, very small room of error. So if, you know, your registration just moves a millimeter one way or another, that outline is going to look extremely off.
But that's why you
Especially,
also got to get to know your digitizer too, and they need to know what you're running, where you're running, how many you're running. You know,
right.
the kind of, I mean, that plays a big part in it. I mean, that's probably the most common question I could ask. Jeff will look at me and go, okay, so what are we doing? And how are we doing it? And what do you plan on doing? There's lots of questions. So that's knowing your client as well.
Right.
You know, that helps in the process of for you guys when you're digitizing it and the order and efficiency. So.
And there's times where customers will specifically ask something, and it's not traditionally what the rules I follow, but it's like, hey, if you know your machine better than I do, and if
Right.
that's what you prefer, absolutely tell me, and I'll do it that way.
Right.
But also the black outline for the lettering is only 1 millimeter in width.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that tells you how small of a margin you have to work with. You're off
Yes.
even a little bit, and it's noticeable.
Exactly. Yeah. We haven't even got to we're focusing on the outline of just the puff part. But yeah, once we get to that top lettering, like you said, that lettering border is very, very thin. You got to remember, basically the width of a normal 40 weight thread is about 1 millimeter wide. So you're trying to do a satin stitch that's the width of a thread. So if you do have any registration problems at all, lining it up from the get-go is going to be hard enough. But trying to lay it all out where you do all the gray and then come back and I'll do all the black, it's going to be off quite a bit. So real quick, just looking at the way the 3D puff is going to sew now, they do opt to start off with a running stitch down the center to tack down the foam. When you are working with designs, let's see. So these are about 3 millimeters wide, which typically I think is minimum to have a good looking 3D puff design, minimum width on an element. I'm not a big fan with using the tack down stitch to hold down your foam when working with such a thin element, only because working with those tack down stitches, I'm going to move them on top so you can see them here. Again, you're only utilizing a millimeter and a half on each side for clearance to make sure that tack down stitch doesn't roll off that foam and end up being outside of your top stitch. I have used the tack down stitch. There is certain customers, again, request that to use that to tack down their foam. I typically like to use either the rubber band method, which utilizes, if you put the piece of foam on the hat, you put a rubber band that's a nice big rubber band.
I have a question, Justin, because I'm pretty sure I just saw, and I think it was on your page, the video of you running one of those hats where you put the rubber band on so that you can see. If you guys want to see exactly how he's using the rubber band, that's a good video.
I'm clearly rogue. I just hold it there because I only have a single head. So I don't, it doesn't, I just hold it there. I don't use the rubber band. I'm a,
she doesn't need fingers.
I'm a rebel, apparently.
Yeah, so if you are on social media, check out Jay Digitizing Studios on Facebook. There is a video with me running this hat, and yes, there is a little quick clip in there when we place the foam, putting the rubber band on. So yes, that is a very good. It's Jay Digitizing Studios.
Well, that's your thing.
That's my old account.
That's
that
not
got
my
shut
fault.
down.
You guys don't know how to do your stuff. I will edit it. It's Jay Digitizing Studio.
Yes, Studios.
Thank you. I fixed it. I did my job.
But yeah, the idea of using the single stitch down the center, that is used to tack down foam to hold it in place to make sure that it's not moving all over the place like some people do, trying to hold it in place without anything tacking it down. But on designs like this where the elements are pretty thin, there is a good chance where that running stitch is going to kind of roll off that foam one way or another, and it's going to be apparent outside that satin stitch. So in this case, I don't think it's a very good idea. Comments there, Jeff, as you smirk?
As I smirk, well, you know, when I look at that and I watch how that run stitch goes, and let me pull it up in my software because I can't watch your software. It's right there. You know, it pretty much moves from left to right on that V. And if you're going to use that method at all, you're going to have to go center out, especially when you're running foam, because that will push that thing over. That run stitch is going to come out, and it's going to
exactly.
You're not
yeah.
going to be
happy. Yeah, if you are using the technique of using the running stitch, like Jeff's saying, you know, say like these were elements that were nice and bold, and there's no risk of that running stitch rolling outside of the top stitch area. That's something where I would kind of go from here to here, and maybe just up here. And what that's doing is just a few tack down stitches on the ends, on the most extreme ends, bottom, top, left, just to tack down the foam. Because all you're doing is making sure that foam's not kind of turning or twisting as you're running.
It does that.
It does do that.
How I know.
It does that, and not only does it sometimes, you know, if you're not paying attention too much and it turns one way and you're not using a big enough piece of foam, you're going to now miss the foam area when you're sewing the design. And or, you know, when you have this material, you're adding another layer, and a thick layer at that, trying to sew through, and you have now a moving target for that needle to go through.
Twist it back.
Yeah, when you have that needle, that moving element, and that needle trying to sew through it, you're gonna have all kinds of problems. So, and this is coming from experience that Jeff and I have done and failed.
Don't repeat our mistakes.
Well, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of this is to help people not make the mistakes that we make, because we do a lot of that.
So
let us learn first.
As I Vanna White and I tap the tile, right, and it turns over. There's a question. Does it matter if you're stacking foam?
I was about to bring that up.
I would just lost my job.
I am not a big fan of stacking foam.
Why?
There was actually somebody that I helped out. I don't think I did their design. I didn't do their design on Digitizing 911, but it was another question in the group. The digitizing wasn't all that bad. There was a few adjustments that I made once I saw the file, but then I found out they were stacking 3 pieces of 2mm foam to make it 6 millimeters. So not only do you have 1 layer shifting, you have 3 layers shifting to each other. And it's just causing a world of hurt. It's causing nesting. It's causing needle breaks. You're throwing obstacles in front of this needle that's trying to sew through these layers in the first place, and you're just asking for trouble.
So as someone who has a unicorn horn on the front of a hat, when you stack foam, the layers will individually shift.
Mm-hmm.
And when those layers individually shift, now you're going to get deviation. And when you get deviation, your needle hits the needle plate and it breaks. Right. I was indulged. Let me put it that way. I was indulged with Justin's help and help from Louise to sew 12 millimeters of foam on a hat. Now, after some slight modifications to machines and a lot of work on the file, it was successful. The higher you stack your foam, your push comp becomes more. So it'll really push out those ends because now you're laying that thread up higher. But the biggest thing that I actually learned from that whole interesting experiment was that if you are going to stack your foam, it is a really, really, really good idea to use temp spray adhesive between the layers.
I was just going to ask that. Can you use the temp spray so that it doesn't shift? Because I could see why. I mean, I guess you're tacking it down all at the same time. Is that correct? You're not doing it as individual layers. You're tacking down it as one piece. So in order for it to be one piece, logic would tell you to put some sort of a spray adhesive to keep it from shifting. But
Now,
at the end of the day, does it, my question is can that fail?
My pro tip would be when you do the spray adhesive to do it on the curve of the cap driver. Again, that was something I learned. But when you start spray adhesing your foam together, now it acts like one piece of foam. And so you're going to get a lot less shifting. And if you're only going up, if you're doing like 2 millimeter, 3 layers of 2 millimeters, you're not really going to have any issues because it's going to move as one piece and it's going to act as one piece. But if you're doing like 4 layers of 2 millimeter foam, because you really want to hit that. I know a lot of manufacturers have 8 millimeters as their top end. Some it's 6, some it's 8. If you really want to hit that before the presser foot starts crating, then you can have an issue. But you're going to want to make sure that you spray adhesive that in a curve. And your goal in that whole thing is to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of shifting and deviation that can happen, because you will break needles if it does.
Yeah, what he was saying as far as spraying it on a curve is, using the curve of the hat, because if you were to just spray the flat pieces together, now you got to imagine trying to bend those 3 pieces that have already been glued together,
and they don't.
So when you're gluing it, you want to kind of shape one piece, spray adhesive it, shape another piece, and so on and so forth. But I'm not a big fan, as he was explaining to it. Not only does it sound like it's adding so much time to production, if you are experimenting like Jeff, that was something that Jeff was just doing to experiment on one hat. It's not like he had to run 100 hats for that.
Let's just say it was pins and needles the whole time.
Right.
I had a spare reciprocator.
I'm a big fan of 3 to 4 millimeters when it comes to foam.
Is that what yours is that you sell?
This one is 3.
The ones that you sell and
yeah,
the foam you sell. Okay, that's.
Oh yes, the foam I sell is 3 millimeters. The density of the foam, I think, is the most important. 2 millimeters foam, I don't think really does much of effect, and to me, it's not worth the extra effort.
You don't want to be running out using craft foam.
No.
Okay.
Craft foam is so soft that by the time you sew it with the densities that the Digitizer is using to work with 3 to 4 millimeter embroidery foam, it's just going to smash that 2 millimeter down. You can't even, or the craft foam down. You can't even.
I know it sounds crazy, but people are always looking way to save a buck or two, and then really at the end it doesn't. So
right. So
definitely pick your target foam. Like if you want this design to be 6 millimeters, go buy 6 millimeter foam.
Right.
Don't try to stack it. Just go buy 6 millimeter foam.
Right.
In which quality. This design, I would not suggest using 6 millimeter foam. When you're dealing with 3 millimeters, which is not to say that designs can't be done under 3 millimeters and still work for 3D Puff. It's kind of a headache. But when I'm teaching my classes, I preach that 3 millimeters is your minimum width that you want to work with for production's sake, to get nice clean foam elements, 3D Puff elements. So I would not go with 6 millimeters foam on this. I think it's just too skinny. It's going to cause too many problems. And again, something that I've taught in my classes, the 6 millimeter foam, when you're doing with a satin this thin, it starts leaning one way or another. It's like that thread is trapping that 6 millimeter foam. And when you start really looking at the designs, they kind of look lopsided to me. So 3 to 4 millimeter dense foam is the way to go, in my opinion, 99% of the time when it comes to 3D Puff designs. All right, so the other thing that I was talking about as far as the push and pull, we did compensate for the basically the pull on the insides, but this, as you can see, this is a uniform distance as far as on the ends as well as the sides. So if you're compensating for these pull in from the sides, this isn't really compensating for the push. So when this is actually sewn, this is actually going to be probably closer to something like this. That foam and those satins are going to push out quite a bit. So you don't want that ununiform look where the edges or the ends of your satins look thinner as far as your border than your sides. The easy compensation for that is just bringing these points and pulling them in. And another thing I'm also seeing, these are the caps that are properly used. Now the caps of the ends of the satins are used to cut the foam at those, since the end of the satin doesn't have any stitches that are going, perpendicular to that shape. You need something that's going to cut the ends of those caps, or the ends of those satins, as far as cutting the foam. These are properly done where I can see that they did use some space between. There is a gap left, and what that ensures is you are going to have that push of the satin. And if you were to have the edge of that cap right along the edge of the satin that's digitized, when it eventually that cap pulls in and the satin pushes out, you have something what's called waterfalling. And that's where the satin on the edge of that cap, it's going to cut the foam, and the edge of that satin keeps on sewing and pushes over it. So you have these loose threads at the end. It's a really unkept look. So that was properly done as far as leaving the little bit of gap in there to ensure that push is going to line up with the caps. The one thing I did notice as far as the caps is that they are only about an inch or 1.5 millimeters wide. To me, that's a little bit too thin. This is about 1.5 millimeters wide by 1.5 millimeters tall. So basically, you're trying to smash a lot of stitches in a very, very small area going through foam. You're going to have some issues there with thread breaks and whatnot. So I would make the caps a lot wider. And that way there is room.
I mean, when it comes to caps, the longer you can make those stitches, the better.
Correct. Yeah. So getting these stitches a little bit longer is definitely going to help. Again, noticing that there is a distance here that this cap, as you can see, this cap is thinner than this top satin, and you're going to make it wider since it's going to be sitting up underneath. You're not worried about this end as far as where it's going to be sewing into there, but they did properly place this where it's compensating for the push out of those satins, and it's compensating for the push out of these sides of the cap, so it's not going to push out past the satin. So that was done properly. But I would go through here, just for time's sake. I'm going to kind of show where I would make those adjustments. And Martha, I know you are in the audience here. I will make these adjustments properly and send you the file. So basically, all these little areas, there's a bunch of weird stuff going on that DST that I'll delete here so you can see. So you can see basically the overcompensation here, the making these outlines wider, stopping those satins short to make sure that when they do push out, that outline is going to look uniform. It's going to look the same width all the way around, and you're not going to be fighting against it. Really quick, since we only have a few more minutes, I do want to touch on what DJ was talking about earlier. And if we do measure these satins up here, these satin borders are quite a bit smaller. That's very, very, very thin.
So for those of us who couldn't see that on that tiny little screen, how wide were those measurements you were taking?
Those were 1 millimeter. Yeah.
Okay.
So Yeah, so a millimeter a border on a hat, and you're trying to outline a letter, and you got to remember when it comes to text, that's the first thing your eye goes to. So if anything, you want to make sure that your text is very, very legible. And
I mean, everybody knows what text looks like. You don't have to be an
exactly.
embroiderer to know if the text is wrong.
Exactly. So at 9 millimeters tall, a couple things as a digitizer. You look for the alternatives to doing this 1 millimeter wide satin. First, a lot of people go to running stitch outlines. I'm not a big fan. I don't think they look very clean. It kind of really gives that kind of dotted look to it because you are really seeing the individual stitches. So I'm not a big fan of that. Another approach, again, it does alter the look of the original art, just assuming that this is digitized to exactly what the art looked like. But I would actually opt to kind of taking the outline a little bit wider out.
Would you space those letters out a little bit so they're not on top of each other?
That is another thing that I would do as well.
Yeah, because that, from a designer's point of view, is driving my brain absolutely crazy. Well, that's a bit much.
Okay. So another thing is not trying to, I was using a tool here that's a column C where basically I'm plotting the points, and it's a setting where I could set an actual width to it. Let's take a pull comp off of those. I can grab
It just
here.
looks better. Even though I know you're still playing with the adjustments, just from the eye's point of view, it just looks better.
So yeah, so if I remove that outline that's there. So what I did was I just basically took the outline area that basically the inside area that they're trying to leave, which again is less than a millimeter wide.
Eesh.
So these areas are not going to jive very well when it's sewn. And taking that outline and basically placing it a little bit further outside of that inside of the letter kind of gives that letter a bolder look. You're going to have a lot more surface area of that letter showing through. This is actually 1.5 millimeters now. These outlines are 1.5 millimeters wide.
It looks crisper.
Yeah,
like,
so
more legible, I guess, is the.
And what you would need to do is, and again, this is possibly changing the original artwork as far as how wide that text is, but you are going to need to do that in order to achieve all the letters with this nice bold outline and the inside of the letter being a little bit bolder. So you're going to have a cleaner sew. The lettering is going to be a little bit wider.
And that's something you have to explain to your end user, your client, when you're having this stuff digitized. Hey, listen, the design might not be spot on. Do understand that I have to take into account, meaning basically you guys have to take into account what that needle is going to do.
Right.
And that we have to make the adjustments. So it's going to be slightly altered, and you can't just, throw it to the wind and say, yeah, it'll stick.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. So for me, these are just things you have to explain. And you said this is Martha's design. I would definitely go with that, Martha.
Yeah.
From a designer's point of view.
And I know traditionally this is done where it's the outline color's done, or the inside color's done, and then the outline over it. I think that really lends to a nice clean edge. But because we are working with such a small letter and a small area to work with, another way of doing it is kind of digitizing it in the style of 3D Puff, where you do the outline first. And where that helps you is you could actually make these outline stitches quite a bit wider because you're not worried about how far underneath that letter it goes. All you're worried about is, the surface area that's going to be sewn around the letter. So it gives you an opportunity to make those borders a lot wider because they can go up underneath the inside of the letter and the lettering on top. I think Jeff digitizes this style when it comes to outline lettering a lot.
I do too. If it's like that 1
Yeah.
millimeter range, it's easier to get a clean edge.
Right. So the visual part might be only a millimeter or more, but the actual sewn width of that outline is a lot more. So it kind of gives you that percentage of error a lot greater when you're trying to line up those two elements. So this is probably the way I would go ahead and do it. And
it was something you used to see a lot more in years past. Like a lot of old school digitizers would use that method a lot. And it's kind of becoming a lost art in a way. So I'm glad you brought it up because you get more width. You get more width to work with, which is easier on the machine, less issues with needles, thread breaks, stuff like that. So,
and if you look at if you stand in front of a machine and you're not familiar with digitizing and you watch something sew, there's a lot of times where an embroiderer may look at a design before it's completely sewn and look at things like, what in the world is this design doing? And then when it starts coming together and outlines go on there and different elements that are purposely placed in a different sequence, they do see that in the end that it does sew properly. And it sews better than, trying to traditionally do it and just bailing out because he's laughing at something. But yeah, this is definitely a direction as far as the size of the text with outlines that I would go and the adjustments that I would make. And it looks like Martha is good with the adjustments that I am explaining.
She said the client wants it to be 5 inches high. You can't put
Yeah.
on a hat, can you?
No.
I didn't think so.
I didn't even look at how tall this was. Oh, okay. 2.5
I mean, you're lucky to get 2.5 inches on a good day, I think.
I think Dad has, what, 2.25?
On the Tajimas, we do 2.5. This one's 2.5. So 2.5 all day on Tajima. So, so yes, machine type is definitely going to be a huge difference when it comes to hats. I have some customers.
Pickerless sewing arms.
I have some customers telling me that they only have 2 inches to work with.
That's like a Brother Home machines. They're hard limited at like 1.98 inches.
Yeah.
Number.
And you got people like with ZSKs that are telling me that they'll push it up to 3 inches tall. So,
Jeff, do you with your ZSK?
I have. I mean, I've done a 3.5 inch. It might have been 4. I don't remember. Justin called it cheating. But I got it on.
Maybe because you did it flat,
right?
Where the bill was on.
I heard loophole is what I just heard.
I mean, technically, it was on a hat.
Technically, it wasn't. Technically, it was on material that you made into a hat.
Yeah, but see, there's loopholes. Anyway, we're digressing, boys. Why don't we get back to the hat here? You guys are almost at an hour. So what's your end take on this? Because you guys want to keep it at an hour. So I'm going to...
Well, no, wait. There was a question up earlier. And
go ahead.
Justin, we missed it. And so I wanted to go back and get it. And it was from Cindy. And it is about... Here we go. So when you're talking about the DST, and she goes, is that when you can bring in an ESP file to get the corrected colors? I mean, generally, yes, Justin?
EPS file.
EPS. It might be a Meriden thing because like Happy's, they have a associated MON and an HPM1 file that carries the color information. But generally, like I just look at the run sheet, and then if I really want to change the color in my software, which I don't really ever do, but if I want to, I'll go onto the run sheet and I'll actually type in the thread colors that I want, and I'll follow the run sheet.
Right. And kind of like, I have my software set to the Madeira thread chart. I try to match it as close as possible to the artwork given to me, but I have no idea if the way the art is given to me is going to be the way it's ran on the garments on the end user. I may be digitizing something in one color in black, but it's going to be, sewn in purple on a white shirt. So I try to do as best I can, as best representation. Don't take it literally where, if I tell you that you're using red 1747, you got to go out and buy red 1747. It's just a guide to tell you where the color changes are, a visual too, to kind of see it like, okay, it matches the artwork. I can tell where the red element is in here. I can tell where the black element is, just to kind of give you an idea of what element is what. So. All right. Well, Martha, thank you for your submission. And again, I will finish this up probably tonight or in the morning, email this file over to you. We do ask in return to post the results in the group. Let us know how it works out for you. Anything you guys want to talk about? I know you guys have AG coming up.
Go for it, Nikki. I'm looking for something.
Muted.
Justin, I'm going to put the USA design on this hat. What do you think?
Oh, nice. That's
right?
awesome.
And it flashes too, but I don't want to give somebody a seizure for flashing. Yes, we have AG coming up. Jeff and I are co-teaching a class, and we're going from embroidery to sublimation and everything in between. And then you have a hat class, and I'm teaching actually how to build an Equid site. For those who want to learn how to build a website, quick, easy, you could do it within an hour, and get stuff up and running. And it's super, super simple. And that's going to be my Friday class. And then on my Saturday class, I'm teaching an advanced sublimation class. And I'm also on the panel and on the floor. So I'm all over the place.
Nice.
Miss Jeffrey.
Yep, I'm doing that. And then I'm teaching. I'm not teaching. I'm assisting Adam in his class, Evil Embroidery Laboratory. It's gonna be awesome.
That's Jeff decided to take the easy route this year and do lots of co-classes so that Adam and I do all the work. We do all the heavy lifting. That's what this is. He just shows up and is pretty. That's what it is.
Okay, so if you guys have a design that you want us to look at, you can email it to info@theembroiderynerd.com, title it Digitizing 911, and we'll take a look at it. And if we think it's a good candidate, we can pull it up and take a look.
And if you do want this design or this design, and I actually have a couple other ones that are kind of.
You had a bunch this time.
4th of July theme. I had some fun doing those. Check it out, digitizing.com. I have a link down in the notes as well. And free of charge. Download them. Let's see some samples. I'd love to see it.
I think those are time limited too, aren't they, Justin?
Yeah, typically when I do it around holidays, I'll do it for the month of the holiday. So yeah, they are available now, since I usually tend to come out with them a day before the holiday. I try to be a little bit beforehand this time. But yeah, they'll be free from now through July, and I hope you enjoy. Had a lot of fun doing them.
Very cool. All right, awesome. Do your spiel, Jeffrey.
Okay, so we'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us. That is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. We have Nikki Damkovich, the Sassy Subber from thesassysubber.com. We have DJ Anderson from Digitizing Masterclass, and I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we will catch you guys next time.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.